The Chesapeake Leopard affair was a naval incident that occurred on June 22, 1807, between the British warship HMS Leopard and the American frigate USS Chesapeake. The affair caused a public outcry in the United States and increased the tensions that led to the War of 1812. In the affair, the British captain, Salisbury Price Humphreys, demanded to board the Chesapeake and search for deserters from the Royal Navy, but the American Commodore James Barron refused to comply. The Leopard then opened fire on the Chesapeake, killing 3 and wounding 18 of its crew. Barron surrendered his ship and allowed the British to take 4 men, one of whom was later hanged. Barron was accused of negligence, lack of preparation, and failure to fight courageously. The trial took place on board the Chesapeake in Norfolk, Virginia, from January 9th to February 8th, 1808. The court was presided by John Rogers and included Stephen Decatur as a member. Barron was found guilty of the second charge and suspended from command for 5 years. After his suspension, Barron remained in Europe for 10 years, pursuing commercial interests. He returned to the United States in 1818, but was not assigned to sea duty, despite his efforts to obtain a command.
Hampton, Virginia, June 12, 1819. To Commodore Stephen Decatur, Washington. Sir, I have been informed in Norfolk that you have said that you could insult me with impunity, or words to that effect. If you have said so, you will no doubt avow it, and I shall expect to hear from you. I am, sir, your obedient servant, James Barron.
Washington, June 17, 1819. To Commodore James Barron, Hampton, Virginia. Sir, I have received your communication of the 13th instant. Before you could have been entitled to the information you have asked of me, you should have given up the name of your informer. That frankness which ought to characterize our profession required it. I shall not, however, refuse to answer you on that account, but shall be as candid in my communication to you as your letter or the case will warrant. Whatever I may have thought or said in the very frequent and free conversation I have had respecting you and your conduct, I feel a thorough conviction that I never could have been guilty of so much egotism as to say that I could insult you, or any other man, with impunity. Your obedient servant, Stephen Decatur.
Hampton, Virginia, June 25, 1819. To Commodore Stephen Decatur, Washington. Sir, your communication of the 17th instant, in answer to mine of the 13th, I have received. The circumstances that urged me to call on you for the information requested in my letter would, I presume, have instigated you or any other person to the same conduct that I pursued. Several gentlemen in Norfolk, not your enemies, nor actuated by any malicious motive, told me that such a report was in circulation, but could not now be traced to its origin. I therefore concluded to appeal to you, supposing, under such circumstances, that I could not outrage any rule of decorum or candor. This, I trust, will be considered as a just motive for the course I have pursued. Your declaration, if I understand it correctly, relieves my mind from the apprehension that you had so degraded my character as I had been induced to allege. I am, sir, your obedient servant, James Barron.
Washington, June 29, 1819. To Commodore James Barron, Hampton, Virginia. Sir, I have received your communication of the 25th, in answer to mine of the 17th, and, as you have expressed yourself doubtfully, as to your correct understanding of my letter of the aforesaid date, I have now to state, and I request you to understand distinctly, that I meant no more than to disclaim the specific and particular expression to which your inquiry was directed, to wit, that I had said that I could insult you with impunity. As to the motives of these several gentlemen in Norfolk, your informants, or the rumors which cannot be traced to their origin, on which their information was founded, or who they are, is a matter of perfect indifference to me, as is also your motives in making such an inquiry upon such information. Your obedient servant, Stephen Decatur.
Hampton, October 23, 1819. Sir, I had supposed that the measure of your ambition was nearly completed, and that your good fortune had rendered your reputation for acts of magnanimity too dear to be risked wantonly on occasions that can never redound to the honor of him that would be great. I had also concluded that your rancor towards me was fully satisfied by the cruel and unmerited sentence passed upon me by the court of which you were a member. and after an exile from my country, family, and friends of nearly 7 years, I had concluded that I should now be allowed at least to enjoy that solace with this society that lacerated feelings like mine required, and that you would have suffered me to remain in quiet possession of those enjoyments. But scarcely had I set my foot on my native soil ere I learnt that the same malignant spirit which had before influenced you to endeavor to ruin my reputation was still at work, and that you were ungenerously traducing my character whenever an occasion occurred which suited your views, and in many instances, not much to your credit as an officer, through the medium of our juniors. Such conduct cannot fail to produce an injurious effect on the discipline and subordination of the Navy. A report of this sort, sir, coming from the respectable and creditable sources it did, could not fail to arrest my attention, and to excite those feelings which might naturally be expected to arise in the heart of every man who professes to entertain principles of honor, and intends to act in conformity with them. With such feelings, I addressed a letter to you under date of the 13th June last, which produced a correspondence between us, which I have since been informed you have endeavored to use to my farther injury by sending it to Norfolk by a respectable officer of the Navy, to be shown to some of my particular friends with a view of alienating from me their attachment. I am also informed that you have tauntingly and boastingly observed that you would cheerfully meet me in the field, and hoped I would yet act like a man, or that you had used words to that effect. Such conduct, sir, on the part of anyone, but especially one occupying the influential station under the government which you hold, towards an individual, situated as I am, and oppressed as I have been, and that chiefly by your means, is unbecoming you as an officer and a gentleman, and shows a want of magnanimity which, hostile as I have found you to be towards me, I had hoped for your own reputation you possessed. It calls loudly for redress at your hands. I consider you as having given the invitation, which I accept, and will prepare to meet you at such time and place as our respective friends, hereafter to be named, shall designate. I also, under all the circumstances of the case, consider myself entitled to the choice of weapons, place, and distance. But, should a difference of opinion be entertained by our friends, I flatter myself, from your known personal courage, that you would disdain any unfair advantage, which your superiority in the use of the pistol and the natural defect in my vision, increased by age, would give you. I will thank you not to put your name on the cover of your answer, as I presume you can have no disposition to give unnecessary pain to the females of my family. I am, sir, your obedient servant, James Barron.
Washington, October 31st, 1819. Sir, your letter of the 23rd instant has been duly received. Nearly 4 months having elapsed since the date of our last correspondence, your letter was unexpected to me, particularly as the terms used by you in the conclusion of your letter to me of 25th of June, and your silence since receiving my letter of the 29th June, indicated, as I thought, satisfaction on your part. But it seems that you consider yourself aggrieved by my sending our June correspondence to Norfolk. I did not send the June correspondence to Norfolk until 3 months had expired after your last communication, and not then until I had been informed by a captain of the Navy that a female of your acquaintance had stated that such a correspondence had taken place. If that correspondence has, in any degree, alienated your friends from you, such effect is to be attributed to the correspondence itself. I thought the papers would speak for themselves, and sent them without written comment. With respect to the court-martial upon you for the affair of the Chesapeake, to which you have been pleased to refer, I shall not treat the officers who compose that court with so much disrespect as to attempt a vindication of their proceedings. The chief magistrate of our country approved them, the nation approved them, and the sentence has been carried into effect. But, sir, there is a part of my conduct, on that occasion, which it does not appear irrelevant to revive in your recollection. It is this: I was present at the court of inquiry upon you, and heard the evidence then adduced for and against you. Thence I drew an opinion altogether unfavorable to you, and, when I was called upon by the Secretary of the Navy to act as a member of the court-martial ordered for your trial, I begged to be excused the duty, on the ground of my having formed such an opinion. The Honorable Secretary was pleased to insist on my serving. Still anxious to be relieved from this service, I did, prior to taking my seat as a member of the court, communicate to your able advocate, General Taylor, the opinion I had formed, and my correspondence with the Navy Department upon the subject, in order to afford you an opportunity, should you deem it expedient to protest against my being a member on the ground of my not only having formed, but expressed an opinion unfavorable to you. You did not protest against my being a member. Duty constrained me, however unpleasant it was, to take my seat as a member. I did so, and discharged the duty imposed upon me. You, I find, are incapable of estimating the motives which guided my conduct in this transaction. For my conduct as a member of that court-martial, I do not consider myself as in any way accountable to you. But, sir, you have thought fit to deduce, from your impressions of my conduct as a member of that court-martial, inferences of personal hostility towards you. Influenced by feelings thence arising, you commenced the June correspondence, a correspondence which I had hoped would have terminated our communications. Between you and myself, there never has been a personal difference. But I have entertained, and do still entertain the opinion, that your conduct as an officer, since the affair of the Chesapeake, has been such as ought to forever bar your readmission into the service. Under these circumstances, I have judged it expedient at this time to state, as distinctly as may be in my power, the facts upon which I ground the unfavorable opinion which I entertain and have expressed of your conduct as an officer since the court-martial upon you, while I disclaim all personal enmity towards you. Some time after you had been suspended from the service for your conduct in the affair of the Chesapeake, you proceeded in a merchant brig from Norfolk to Pernambuco, and by a communication from the late Captain Lewis, whose honor and veracity were never yet questioned. It appears that you stated to Mr. Lyon, the British consul at Pernambuco, with whom you lived, that if the Chesapeake had been prepared for action, you would not have resisted the attack of the Leopard, assigning as a reason that you knew, as did also our government, there were deserters on board your ship, that the President of the United States knew there were deserters on board, and of the intention of the British to take them, and that the President caused you to go out in a defenseless state for the express purpose of having your ship attacked and disgraced, and thus attain his favorite object of involving the United States in a war with Great Britain. For confirmation of this information, Captain Lewis refers to Mr. Thomas Goodwin of Baltimore, the brother of Captain Ridgely of the Navy, who received it from Mr. Lyon himself. Reference was made to Mr. Goodwin, who, in an official communication, confirmed all that Captain Lewis had said. The veracity and respectability of Mr. Goodwin are also beyond question. You will be enabled to judge of the impression made upon Captain Lewis's mind by the following strong remarks he made on the subject. I am now convinced that Barron is a traitor, for I can call by no other name a man who would talk in this way to an Englishman and an Englishman in office. These communications are now in the archives of the Navy Department. If, sir, the affair of the Chesapeake excited the indignant feelings of the nation towards Great Britain and was, as everyone admits, one of the principal causes which produced the late war, did it not behove you to take an active part in the war for your own sake? Patriotism out of the question. But, sir, instead of finding you in the foremost ranks, on an occasion which so emphatically demanded your best exertions, it is said, and is credited, that you were, after the commencement of the war, to be found in the command of a vessel sailing under British license, though urged by your friends to avail yourself of some one of the opportunities which were every day occurring in privateers or other fast-sailing merchant vessels, sailing from France and other places, to return to your country during the war. It is not known that you manifested a disposition to do so, excepting in the single instance by the cartel John Adams, in which vessel, you must have known, you could not be permitted to return without violating her character as a cartel. You say you have been oppressed. You know, sir, that by absenting yourself, as you did for years, from the country, without leave from the government, you subjected yourself to be stricken from the rolls. You know also that, by the 10th article of the Act for the Better Government of the Navy, all persons in the Navy holding intercourse with an enemy become subject to the severest punishment known to our laws. You have not, for the offenses before stated, to my knowledge, received even a reprimand. And I do know that your pay, even during your absence, has been continued to you, As to my having spoken of you injuriously to junior officers, I have to remark that such is the state of our service that we have but few seniors. If I speak with officers at all, the probability is it will be with a junior. On your return to this country, your efforts to re-establish yourself in the service were known and became a subject of conversation with officers as well as others. In the many and free conversations I have had respecting you and your conduct, I have said, for the causes above enumerated, that, in my opinion, you ought not to be received again into the naval service, that there was not employment for all the officers who had faithfully discharged their duty to their country in the hour of trial, and that it would be doing an act of injustice to employ you, to the exclusion of any one of them. In speaking thus, and endeavoring to prevent your readmission, I conceive that I was performing a duty I owe to the service, that I was contributing to the preservation of its respectability. Had you have made no effort to be re-employed after the war, it is more than probable I might not have spoken of you. If you continue your efforts, I shall certainly, from the same feelings of public duty by which I have hitherto been actuated, be constrained to continue the expression of my opinions, and I can assure you that in the interchange of opinions with other officers respecting you, I have never met with more than one who did not entirely concur with me. The objects of your communication of the 23rd, as expressed by you, now claim my notice. You profess to consider me as having given you an invitation. You say that you have been told that I have tauntingly and boastingly observed that I would cheerfully meet you in the field, and hoped you would yet act like a man. One would naturally have supposed that, after having been so recently led into an error by rumors which could not be traced, you would have received, with some caution, subsequent rumors. At all events, that you would have endeavored to have traced them before again venturing to act upon them as if they were true. Had you have pursued this course, you would have discovered that the latter rumors were equally unfounded as the former. I never invited you to the field, nor have I expressed a hope that you would call me out. I was informed by a gentleman with whom you had conferred upon the subject that you left Norfolk for this place, some time before our June correspondence, with the intention of calling me out. I then stated to that gentleman, as I have to all others with whom I have conversed upon the subject, that if you made the call, I would meet you, but that, on all scores, I should be much better pleased to have nothing to do with you. I do not think that fighting duels, under any circumstances, can raise the reputation of any man, and have long since discovered that it is not even an unerring criterion of personal courage. I should regret the necessity of fighting with any man, but in my opinion, the man who makes arms his profession is not at liberty to decline an invitation from any person who is not so far degraded as to be beneath his notice. Having incautiously said, I would meet you, I will not now consider this to be your case, although many think so, and if I had not pledged myself, I might reconsider the case. From your manner of proceeding, it appears to me that you have come to the determination to fight someone, and that you have selected me for that purpose, and I must take leave to observe that your object would have been better attained had you have made this decision during our late war, when your fighting might have benefited your country as well as yourself. The style of your communication and the matter did not deserve so dispassionate and historical a notice as I have given it, and had I believed it would receive no other inspection than yours, I should have spared myself the trouble. The course I adopted with our former correspondence, I shall pursue with this, if I shall deem it expedient. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Stephen Decatur.
Hampton, November 30th, 1819. Sir, I did not receive until Tuesday the 9th instant your very lengthy, elaborate, and historical reply without date to my letter to you of the 23rd ultimo, which, from its nature and object, did not, I conceive, require that you should have entered so much into detail in defense of the hostile and unmanly course you have pursued towards me since the affair of the Chesapeake, as you term it. A much more laconic answer would have served my purpose, which for the present is nothing more than to obtain at your hands honorable redress for the accumulated insults which you, sir, in particular above all my enemies, have attempted to heap upon me, in every shape in which they could be offered. Your last voluminous letter is alone sufficient proof, if none other existed, of the rancorous disposition you entertain towards me and the extent to which you have carried it. That letter I should no otherwise notice than merely to inform you it had reached me, and that I am prepared to meet you in the field upon anything like fair and equal grounds. But, inasmuch as you have intimated that our correspondence is to go before the public, I feel it a duty I owe to myself and to the world to reply particularly to the many calumnious charges and aspersions with which your dispassionate and historical notice of my communications so abundantly teems, wishing you, sir, at the same time distinctly to understand that it is not for you alone, or to justify myself in your estimation, that I take this course. I anticipated, however, from what I had found you capable of doing to my injury, the use to which you would endeavor to pervert that correspondence, and have not at all been disappointed. I have not said, nor did I mean to convey such an idea, nor will my letter bear the interpretation that your forwarding to Norfolk our June correspondence had in any degree alienated my friends from me, but that it was sent down there with that view. It is a source of great consolation to me, sir, to know that I have more friends, both in and out of the Navy, than you are aware of, and that it is not in your power, great as you may imagine your official influence to be, to deprive me of their good opinion and affection. As to the reason which seems to have prompted you to send that correspondence to Norfolk, that a female of my acquaintance had stated that such and one had taken place, I will only remark that she did not derive her information from me, that it has always been and ever will be with me a principle to touch as delicately as possible upon reports said to come from females intended to affect injuriously the character of anyone, and that in a correspondence like the present, highly as I estimate the sex, I should never think of introducing them as authority. Females, sir, have nothing, or ought to have nothing to do in controversies of this kind. In speaking of the court-martial which sat upon my trial, I have cast no imputation or reflection upon the members individually who composed it, saving yourself, which required that you should attempt a vindication of their proceedings, champion as you are, and hostile as some of them may have been to me. Nor does the language of my letter warrant any such inference. I merely meant to point out to you, sir, what you appear to have been incapable of perceiving, the indelicacy of your conduct, to say the least of it, in hunting me out as an object for malignant persecution, after having acted as one of my judges and giving your voice in favor of a sentence against me, which I cannot avoid repeating, was cruel and unmerited. It is the privilege, sir, of a man deeply injured as I have been by that decision, and conscious of his not deserving it, as I feel myself, to remonstrate against it, and I have taken the liberty to exercise that privilege. You say that the proceedings of the court have been approved by the chief magistrate of our country, that the nation approved of them, and that the sentence has been carried into effect. It is true the President of the United States did approve of that sentence, and that it was carried into effect, full and complete effect, which I should have supposed ought to have glutted the envious and vengeful disposition of your heart. But I deny that the nation has approved of that sentence, and as an appeal appears likely to be made to them, I am willing to submit the question. The part you took on that occasion, it was totally unnecessary, I assure you, to revive in my recollection. It is indelibly imprinted on my mind and can never, while I have life, be erased. You acknowledge you were present at the court of inquiry in my case, heard the evidence for and against me, and had therefore formed and expressed an opinion unfavorable to me, and yet your conscience was made of such pliable materials that because the then Honorable Secretary of the Navy was pleased to insist on your serving as a member of the court-martial, and because I did not protest against it, you conceive that duty constrained you, however unpleasant, to take your seat as a member, although you were to act under the solemn sanction of an oath, to render me impartial justice upon the very testimony which had been delivered in your hearing before the court of inquiry, and from which you drew an opinion altogether unfavorable to me. How such conduct can be reconciled with the principles of common honor and justice is to me inexplicable. Under such circumstances, no consideration, no power or authority on earth could or ought to have forced any liberal high-minded man to sit in a case which he had prejudged, and to retort upon you your own expressions. You must have been incapable of seeing the glaring impropriety of your conduct, for which, although you do not conceive yourself in any way accountable to me, I hope you will be able to account for it with your God and your conscience. You say between you and myself, there never has been a personal difference, and you disclaim all personal enmity towards me. If every step you have taken, every word you have uttered, and every line you have written in relation to me, if your own admission of the very frequent and free conversations you have had respecting me and my conduct, since the affair of the Chesapeake, bear not the plainest stamp of personal hostility, I know not the meaning of such terms. Were you not under the influence of feelings of this sort? Why not, in your official capacity, call me, or have me brought before a proper tribunal to answer the charges you have preferred against me, and thereby giving me a chance of defending myself? Why speak injuriously of me to junior officers which you do not deny? Why the many frequent and free conversations respecting me and my conduct, which you have taken so much pains to underscore? Why use the insulting expression that you entertained and still do entertain the opinion that my conduct as an officer, since that affair, has been such as ought forever to bar my readmission into the service, and that in endeavoring to prevent it, you conceive you were performing a duty you owe to the service and were contributing to its respectability? Why the threat that if I continued the efforts you say I have been making to be re-employed, you certainly should be constrained to continue the expression of those opinions? Does not all this, together with the whole tenor and tendency of your letter, manifest the most marked personal animosity against me, which an honorable man, acting under a sense of public duty by which you profess to have been hitherto actuated, would disdain even to show, much more to feel? I shall now, sir, take up the specific charges you have alleged against me, and shall notice them in the order in which they stand. The first is one of a very heinous character. It is that I proceeded in a merchant brig to Pernambuco. Could I, sir, during the period of my suspension have gone anywhere in a national vessel? Could I, with what was due to my family, have remained idle? The sentence of the court deprived them of the principal means of subsistence. I was therefore compelled to resort to that description of employment with which I was best acquainted, and on this subject you should have been silent. But you add that the late Captain Lewis of the Navy, who had it from a Mr. Goodwin, who heard it from Mr. Lyon, the British consul at Pernambuco, with whom you undertake to say I lived, represented me as stating that if the Chesapeake had been prepared for action, I would not have resisted the attack of the Leopard, assigning as a reason that I knew, as also did our government, that there were deserters on board the Chesapeake, and that I said to Mr. Lyon further that the President of the United States knew there were deserters on board and of the intention of the British ship to take them, and that the ship was ordered out under these circumstances with a view to bring about a contest which might embroil the two nations in a war. The whole of this, sir, I pronounce to be a falsehood, a ridiculous, malicious, absurd, improbable falsehood, which can never be credited by any man that does not feel a disposition to impress on the opinion of the public that I am an idiot. That I should 2 years after the affair of the Chesapeake make such a declaration, when every proof that could be required of a contrary disposition on the part of the Chief Magistrate had been given, cannot receive credit from anyone, but those that are disposed to consider me such a character as you would represent me to be. I did not live with Mr. Lyon, nor did I ever hold a conversation with him so indelicate as the one stated in Captain Lewis's letter would have been. And with what object could I have made such a communication? Mr. Lyon would naturally have felt a contempt for a man that would have suffered himself to have been made a tool of in so disgraceful an affair. I was the first that informed the President and the Secretary of the Navy that such a letter was in the department even before I had seen it. And again, if the mere oral testimony of a British agent was to be considered as evidence sufficient to arraign an American officer, I think the Navy would quickly be in such a state as it might be desirable for their nation to place it in. These communications, you observe, are now in the archives of the Navy Department. Of this fact, sir, I had long been apprised, and had you, when searching the records of that department for documents to injure my character, looked a little further back, you would perhaps have found others calculated to produce a very different effect. Of my desire to return to the United States during the late war, there are certificates in the Navy Department of the first respectability, which, if you had been disposed to find and quote, are perhaps laying on the same shelf from whence you took those that you appear so anxious to bring to public view. I mean my letter applying for service as soon as an opportunity offered, after the term of my suspension expired. The affair of the Chesapeake did certainly excite, and ought to have excited, the indignant feeling of the nation towards Great Britain. But however it may have justified a declaration of war against that power, it was not, as you assert, everyone admits, one of the principal causes of the late war. That it did not take place, sir, until 5 years after, when that affair had been amicably and, of course, honorably adjusted between the two nations. I mention this fact not on account of its importance, but because you have laid so much stress on that affair, as a reason why I ought to have returned home during the late war, and to show that, although it did happen to be your fortunate lot to have an opportunity of being in the foremost rank on that occasion, of which you seem inclined to vaunt, you are ignorant even of the causes which led to it. For my not returning home during the late war, I do not hold myself, to use your own expressions, in any way accountable to you, sir. It would be for the government, I should suppose, to take notice of my absence if they deem it reprehensible, and they no doubt would have done so, had not the circumstances of the case in their estimation justified it. That they are perfectly satisfied upon this point, I have good reason to believe, and trust I shall be able to satisfy my country also. The President's personal conduct to me and the memorial of the Virginia delegation in Congress to him prove how I stand with those high characters, your opinion notwithstanding to the contrary. I deny, sir, that I ever was urged by my friends, as you in mockery term them, to return home during the late war, nor could it have been requisite for me to have been urged to do so by anyone. Laying patriotism out of the question, as you observe, as well as the reasons why you think it behoved me to adopt that course, there were other incentives strong enough, God knows, to excite a desire on my part to return, and I should have returned, sir, but for circumstances beyond my control, which is not incumbent on me to explain to you. You say by absenting myself for years from the country, without leave from the government, I subjected myself to be stricken from the rolls. I knew also, by the 10th article of the Act for the Better Government of the Navy, that all persons in the Navy holding intercourse with an enemy became subject to the severest punishment known to the law, and that for these offenses, as you are pleased to term them, I have not received, to your knowledge, even a reprimand. But I presume if I have not, it is not your fault. What kind and humane forbearance this after what I have already endured? But, sir, as you seem to be so very intelligent upon other points, pray tell me where was the necessity of my asking for a furlough until the period of my suspension expired, or even after having reported myself for duty without being noticed? As to the charge of my holding intercourse with the enemy, I am at a loss to conceive to what you allude, and should degrade myself by giving it any other reply than to pronounce it. If you mean to insinuate there was any unlawful or improper communication on my part with the government, or any individual of Great Britain as a false and foul aspersion on my character, which no conduct or circumstance of my life, however it might be tortured by your malice or ingenuity, can, in any manner, justify or support. You have been good enough to inform me that on my return to this country, my efforts, as you have been pleased to call them, to reinstate myself in the service were known, and became a subject of conversation with officers, as well as others. And but for those efforts, it is more than probable you would not have spoken of me. This would indeed have displayed a wonderful degree of lenity and courtesy on your part, of which I could not have failed to be duly sensible. But, sir, I beg leave to ask how and where did you get your information that such efforts were made by me, and even admit they were, why should you alone, disclaiming, as you pretend to do, all personal enmity against me, have made yourself so particularly busy on the occasion? Was it because your inflated pride led you to believe that the weight of your influence was greater than that of any other officer of the Navy, or that you were more tenacious of its honor and respectability than the rest of the officers were? You assure me, however, that in the interchange of opinion with other officers respecting me, you have never met with more than one who did not entirely concur with you in the opinion you have expressed of me. Indeed, and what is the reason? It is because I suppose you are most commonly attended by a train of dependents who, to enjoy the sunshine of your favor, act as caterers for your vanity, and revolving around you like satellites, borrow their chief consequence from the countenance you may condescend to bestow upon them. You at length arrive at the main point, the object of my letter of the 23rd ultimo, which you might have reached by a much shorter route, and have saved me the fatigue of being compelled in self-defense to travel with you so far as you have gone. How you can reconcile your affecting indifference towards me in the remark that on all scores you would be much better pleased to have nothing to do with me, with the very active part which it is generally known, and which your own letter clearly evinces, you have taken against me, I am at a loss to conceive. No, sir, you feel not so much unconcern as you pretend and wish it to be believed you do, in regard to the course of conduct my honor and my injuries may, in my judgment, require me to pursue. You have a motive not to be concealed from the world for all you have done or said, or for any future endeavors you may make, to bar my readmission into the service. It is true, You have never given me a direct formal and written invitation to meet you in the field such as one gentleman of honor ought to send to another. But if your own admissions that you had incautiously said you would meet me if I wished it, and that if you had not pledged yourself, you might reconsider the subject, and all this too without any provocation on my part, or the most distant intimation from me that I had a desire to meet you, do not amount to a challenge. I cannot comprehend the object or import of such declarations, made as they were in the face of the world, and to those in particular whom you knew would not only communicate them to me but give them circulation. Under all the circumstances of the case, I consider you as having thrown down the gauntlet, and I have no hesitation in accepting it. Upon the subject of dueling, I perfectly coincide with the opinions you have expressed. I consider it as a barbarous practice which ought to be exploded from civilized society. But, sir, there may be causes of such extraordinary and aggravated insult and injury, received by an individual as to render an appeal to arms on his part absolutely necessary. Mine I conceive to be a case of that description, and I feel myself constrained, by every tie that binds me to society, by all that can make life desirable to me, to resort to this mode of obtaining that redress due to me at your hands as the only alternative which now seems to present itself for the preservation of my honor. To conclude, you say, from my manner of proceeding it appears to you that I have come to the determination to fight someone, and that I have selected you for that purpose, to say nothing of the vanity you display and the importance you seem to attach to yourself in thus intimating that being resolved to fight myself into favor, I could no otherwise do so than by fixing upon you, the very reverse of which you infer is the fact. I never wished to fight in this way, and, had you permitted me to remain at rest, I should not have disturbed you. I should have pursued the even tenor of my way, without regarding you at all. But all this would not have suited your ambitious views. You have hunted me out, have persecuted me with all the power and influence of your office, and have declared your determination to attempt to drive me from the Navy if I should make any efforts to be employed, and for what purpose, or from what other motive than to obtain my rank, I know not. If my life will give it to you, you shall have an opportunity of obtaining it. And now, sir, I have only to add that, if you will make known your determination and the name of your friend, I will give that of mine, in order to complete the necessary arrangements to a final close of this affair. I am, sir, your obedient servant, James Barron.
Washington, 29th of December, 1819. Sir, your communication of the 30th ultimo reached me as I was on the eve of my departure for the North, whence I did not return till the 22nd instant. It was my determination, on the receipt of your letter, not to notice it. But upon mature reflection, I conceive, that as I have suffered myself to be drawn into this unprofitable discussion, I ought not to leave the false coloring and calumnies which you have introduced into your letter unanswered. You state that a much more laconic reply to your letter of 23rd October would have served your purpose. Of this I have no doubt, and to have ensured such an answer, you had only to make a laconic call. I had already informed you of the course I had felt myself bound to pursue respecting you, and of the reasons which induced my conduct, and that, if you required it, I would overcome my own disinclination and fight you. Instead of calling me out for injuries which you chose to insist that I have heaped upon you, you have thought fit to enter into this war of words. I reiterate to you that I have not challenged, nor do I intend to challenge you. I do not consider it essential to my reputation that I should notice anything which may come from you, the more particularly when you declare your sole object in wishing to draw the challenge from me is that you may avail yourself of the advantages which rest with the challenged. It is evident that you think, or your friends for you, that a fight will help you, but in fighting, you wish to incur the least possible risk. Now, sir, not believing that a fight of this nature will raise me at all in public estimation, but may even have a contrary effect, I do not feel at all disposed to remove the difficulties that lay in your way. If we fight, it must be of your seeking, and you must take all the risk and all the inconvenience which usually attend the challenger in such cases. You deny having made the communication to the British consul at Pernambuco, which Captain Lewis and Mr. Goodwin have represented. The man capable of making such a communication would not hesitate in denying it, and until you can bring forward some testimony other than your own, You ought not to expect that the testimony of those gentlemen will be discredited. You have charged the officers who concur with me in opinion respecting your claims to service as being my satellites. I think I am not mistaken when I inform you that all the officers of our grade, your superiors as well as inferiors, with the exception of one who is your junior, concur in the opinion that you ought not to be employed again, whilst the imputations which now lie against you remain. Nor have they been less backward than myself in expressing their opinions. You speak of the good conduct of your ancestors. As your own conduct is under discussion and not theirs, I cannot see how their former good character can at all serve your present purpose. Fortunately for our country, every man stands upon his own merit. Your offering your life to me would be quite affecting, and might, as you evidently intend, excite sympathy if it were not ridiculous. It will not be lost sight of that your jeopardizing your life depends upon yourself and not upon me, and is done with a view to fighting your own character up. I have now to inform you that I shall pay no further attention to any communication you may make to me other than a direct call to the field. Your obedient servant, Stephen Decatur.
Norfolk, January 16, 1820. Sir, your letter of the 29th ulters I have received. In it you say that you have now to inform me that you shall pay no further attention to any communication that I may make to you other than a direct call to the field, in answer to which I have only to reply that whenever you will consent to meet me on fair and equal grounds, that is, such as two honorable men may consider just and proper, you are at liberty to view this as that call. The whole tenor of your conduct to me justifies this course of proceeding on my part. As for your charges and remarks, I regard them not, particularly your sympathy. You know not such a feeling. I cannot be suspected of making the attempt to excite it. I am, sir, yours, etc., James Barron.
Washington, Jan. 24, 1820. Sir, I have received your communication of the 16th and am at a loss to know what your intention is. If you intended it as a challenge, I accept it and refer you to my friend Commodore Bainbridge, who is fully authorized by me to make any arrangement he pleases as regards weapons, mode, or distance. Your obedient servant, Stephen Decatur.
The two men met at Bladensburg, Maryland, and exchanged shots at close range in an arrangement by their seconds that seemed guaranteed to ensure blood would spill. Both were wounded, but Decatur's injury proved fatal. He died the next day, leaving behind a nation in mourning for its fallen hero. Barron survived, but lived in obscurity until his death in 1851.